Welcome to Psych Incubator and Eminent Psychotherapists Revealed. I'm Jeffrey Magnavita, and with my co-hosts tonight, Michael Albert and Kristen Osborne, we are excited and pleased to feature Dr. Sue Johnson. Sue is a leading innovator in the fields of couple therapy and adult attachment. She is the primary developer of emotionally focused couples therapy, which has demonstrated its effectiveness in over 30 years of peer-reviewed clinical research. Sue's received numerous awards. I'm not going to read any more about Sue because most of you probably know about her, but I do want to say Sue sent me her latest book about, this is your latest book, right, Sue? About 6 months ago, and I haven't been able to put it down. We'll be diving into some of this tonight.
Would you give us the title of it? Yes,
I'm sorry. A Primer for Emotionally Focused Individual Therapy, EFIT, Cultivating Fitness and Growth in Every Client. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about Sue's work. But I am so pleased, Sue, that you can join us tonight because you are one of my idols in the field. I love your work, and I am so amazed at the kind of therapy that you just thrills me. So this is a tremendous pleasure for all of us. So without further ado, Michael, why don't you?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm interested in a lot of things, but right now, is this new book the cutting edge, or what is the cutting edge of focus therapy right now, if there is an edge?
Oh, I think there is an edge. We're always going to new places. The cutting edge of EFT, I mean, I hope that we've contributed to and changed the field of couple therapy. I hope that we've managed to bring attachment science into psychotherapy more, because I think it's the future of psychotherapy. I'm very clear about that. But for years and years and years, most of the people I know, including me, have done individual therapy. We've written about couples, researched couples, done books on couples, changing relationships. But, attachment science says that when you create a good relationship, you create a place for people to go into individual growth. We've all worked with individuals for years, especially trauma survivors. So finally, I thought, okay, it's enough. We need to put that out there and refine that and, make it clear. It's the same perspective, the same skills, but it's slightly different. It's a different, individual therapy is kind of different. And so we started to do that. And the more I did it, the more I started to see individuals with a different kind of frame, a frame of not just doing clinical practice, but looking at tapes, understanding what I did, starting a big research study, joining with my colleague, Leanne Campbell, who teaches with me a lot, and deciding to write that book. It's just taken off, and I've become as enamored with it as I was excited and thrilled by it as I was seeing couples all those years ago. So the cutting edge of EFT is EFIT. It's using all the framework that we've learned over 30 years with couples to address depression, anxiety, and PTSD in individuals from an attachment and experiential point of view. And it's fun, it's fascinating, and it's blowing my mind. So that's kind of where it's at. Of course, we also do families and we do couples still, but for me, EFIT is the cutting edge, and also contributing to the trauma literature is the cutting edge, because I think we've advanced a lot talking about trauma. The wonderful new books like Bessel van der Kolk's book, we've understood much more about trauma. But from my point of view, there's still something in the trauma literature that is missing, and that is really how to go into the emotional chaos that is trauma and move people into a core corrective experience. I mean, they can do lots of other things as well. They can do meditation, yoga, all kinds of things. But I think there is a core corrective experience. And my sense is that EFIT can contribute to that, because over the years with couples, we've got pretty good at systematically creating key emotional experience, corrective experiences in therapy with lots of predictability, and they predict success at the end of therapy, and they predict all kinds of successes 3 years later. So EFIT is the cutting edge, Michael.
Thank you so much. Just hearing about it, it's exciting. As you talk about it, you seem very, very happy. I can't think of work that can be more gratifying than this kind of work, because you ride the pony with the people you're working with.
That's right. That's right. And I just did a grief workshop, and we talked about using EFIT for grief and following this organic process called grieving. And I think the strength of this model for me is still that we use attachment science, and we plug into this developmental growth model that tells us who we are as human beings, and we plug into the place people naturally get blocked in their development and growth, and how to deal with those blocks, and the natural organic way of helping people grow. And when you can plug into that, the ability to create significant change just goes through the roof. And I just believe that the biggest strength of our model is that it's based in attachment science. So
this helping people to attach, and also to get to kind of do something about this traumatic origin of it, or this thing that's blocking it, means kind of visiting that hell with them.
yes,
and that's I think people, we don't get too much instruction in how to navigate those waters, or even what it feels like.
you're not kidding.
I think that we kind of learn mechanically. We've learned to do what our teachers do and imitate them in some ways, and repeat their mistakes. And then if we're lucky, we kind of get off of that and begin to learn about that experience and make use of it. And I think what is really impressive to me is just what I was watching you on tape earlier today, and you were very patient, and you kept kind of trying to soothe this woman so that she could kind of slow down and kind of hear what it was like from the other side, and also hear how much agony she was in, because she was just going like this all the time. And you reached over and you tapped her. I almost thought you were going to just stroking your hand at times. I think it was more of a tap, but this calming you were doing and this soothing of her allowed her to slow down and then begin to shift gears. This frenetic behavior was a offensive style of hers, and you got underneath it by kind of just bearing witness to what was going on.
Yeah, that's right. And that's very EFT. EFT is a way of not just intervening, or it's not just a perspective on people, a special kind of attachment orientated developmental perspective. It's a way of being with people. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a surrogate attachment figure. And in a session, whether it's an individual, a couple, or a family, I try to create safe haven, secure base. And the best model for that, if you like, is a good mother. If you watch a good mother with a child who's anxious and vulnerable, the mother tunes into the child, resonates with the child, responds to the child in a repetitive way. The mother uses her voice. Oh, it's a snake. It's a little snake. Yes, that's a snake. But it's scary. Oh, it looks scary. Yes, it's scary. Look at the little snake. Yes, there it is. Oh, there. Yes, you can touch it. Oh, listen to what she's doing. She's soothing the child's nervous system. She's holding the child. And the EFT therapist has to know how to do that. And I think what you just said earlier is very significant, Michael. You said, if you want to do this work, you have to be able to, not quite sure exactly what you said, but you said something like, you have to be able to go in and be with people in their pain. Mm-hmm. Well, you're not going to do that unless you have a map. Yeah. You're not going to do that. And we do have a map. We have a map from attachment science. We have a map from 30 years of working with couples. We do have a map. We know where to go with emotion and how to work with it and how to evoke it and regulate it at the same time. So that gives me confidence. I can go into people's emotional realities knowing that I know how to hold them in it, regulate it, and help them move through it, and that they're going to go somewhere more growthful, because we're trying to grow people, not just to help them cope. And if I have a map, then yeah, I can do that. But I think you're absolutely right. The field of psychotherapy has gone more into quick fixes and apps and formulas and, short sessions and manuals that students just learn. Then when they go out into their practices, they meet all these people who say, well, I hurt in 1,000 different ways, and I don't even feel safe with you. And I've, had 18 traumas in my life. And I don't like being told that my thoughts don't make any sense. Thanks very much. And then the student goes, oh, hell. And then hopefully they come to us. But yeah, and now I've forgotten the second part of your question. But yes, you have to be willing to touch the person's emotion and go with them. And you don't get overwhelmed because you have a map and you know how to move people into and through emotion.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to your discussion about attachment, because a number of years ago, a group of my peers would go up to Austin Riggs for their monthly educational series. And one that is very relevant was, I'm sure you're all familiar with, is Beatrice Beebe, who presented her videotapes. And the experience was just, as you were talking, it relit that part of my limbic system. And I'm thinking, ooh, and ah. So she showed a number of different tapes of women with, I think, 9 months old who had lost their husbands in 9/11 and were traumatized. And she was doing research and microanalyzing the videotapes. But what I thought was really interesting is she shows one segment of a video of a secure attachment. And the mother was doing exactly what you're doing, oohing and ahhing, and everybody in the audience is going, ooh, ah, and everybody's like, and then she puts on one of a disorganized attachment. And so the baby is a little distressed, and the mother starts to get distressed herself, and she starts poking the kid gets more distressed. By the end of it, she's like shaking this child, and everybody in the audience is going, oh. And it's a limbic system experience, just as you were describing. So I think that attachment base is certainly the basis of all psychotherapeutic endeavors, I would say.
Oh, yes. And you know what's interesting to me just recently, because we're talking about cutting edge, of course, in COVID, suddenly everything was online. And I said to myself, Michael, you point out that I do touch people. I mean, I'm English working class. I was born in a pub. So touching people is very difficult for me not to do. Okay, I was told in graduate school, don't touch them. I thought, well, I can't do that. So there you go. I'm going to be a bad therapist. But what I learned was you can do this stuff on a screen, because if I can't touch you, I was thinking of the first couple I worked with online. They were an Inuit couple. And male Inuit withdrawers are something else, okay? When they withdraw, they go out on the ice for 2 weeks and hunt seals, okay? They just don't go to the next room or stay quiet for a minute. So I thought, oh my goodness me, how can I work with this couple, with this man online? And what I learned was that I could use my voice and I could say, Steve, as you say this, if you're going to work with emotion, you have to slow everything down. Emotion is not irrational, it's fast. So Steve, as you say this to me, I want to tell you, I can hear how hard that is for you. And it's so hard for you to talk about this. And if I was there with you, I'd reach out and I'd put my hand on your arm, and you'd feel the heat of my hand on your arm, and you'd feel the pressure of my hand on your arm, and you'd know that I was with you, and I'd see how hard this is. And then, because it's Steve, there's a long silence, and he says, yes, it's really hard. I don't do this. Say, I understand. Then I validate him again. I understand. That's not part of your culture. You learned to be quiet and never speak your heart, right? You were mocked if you spoke your heart. So now I'm asking you to do something very hard. He said, yes, that's right. I say, yes, I understand. Listen to how I'm using my voice, and I can put it into words. I have to slow it down. And if you're going to work with emotion, you've got to slow it down, get specific, tune into people's experience, not their thoughts or their, actions, but you make it an experience. Like the mother, when she's soothing a child, she's changing the child's experience. She's not just telling the child what to do, giving it advice, or, she's creating a new experience. Her voice goes da 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 da. And the message in all of it is, you're not alone, you're not alone, I'm here. Because what trauma or attachment says to us is, people will not walk into their vulnerability alone. It's dumb. It's your whole survival part of your brain says, don't do that. So if you have to help people feel some sense of belonging if they're going to move into becoming. If they're going to grow and explore, you have to take the threat out of the session. Well, how do you do that? Well, you turn up as a presence, the way a mother turns up. First of all, it's the way you're with people, not just what you do, or even how, and you see them through the kind, compassionate, collaborative eyes of a mother, not through a distant professional stance that's looking at your DSM. If somebody says to me, I just did a workshop all day, so this came up. If somebody says, they use an abstract word, I'm depressed.
Mhm.
Well, what did this lady say? Oh, she used another word. And the EFT response is, I'm so sorry, could you help me? I want to know, what does that taste like? What does that feel like? Where is it in your body? When does it come up? What do you see? What do you say to yourself? I want to go in and assemble that emotion, that emotional label as an experience. And then I can go and I can play with that and change the emotional music around that. And then it starts to broaden, right? So I'm just getting into this. I can't even remember what your question was.
I want to read an endorsement from your book and see if you can tell me who wrote the endorsement. Not you, Sue,
Okay.
but our participants and our panel here. When the age-old internal battle between reason and emotion rages endlessly, as it does in our patients seeking therapy, with emotion often winning, it only makes sense that the focus of therapy should be on emotion. Now, two internationally acclaimed experts, blah, 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 talk about emotion. Who do you think wrote that endorsement?
It might have been you.
It's close, but it's another icon in the field. Anybody know? David Barlow.
Oh,
David
yes,
Barlow.
David Barlow.
So when we think about emotion creeping into David's consciousness, it's deeply encoded in all our consciousness. And I just love that endorsement. But there's one more thing I would want to read, and then I'll let you guys talk. This is at the end of your book. Commentators of the therapy field note that fewer people seem to be willing to seek out therapy, and many have little confidence in its effectiveness, Miller 2017, perhaps due to an apparent focus on data collection and intellectual surface elements,
Yes.
rather than on reaching and responding to the heart of our client's suffering.
Yes.
Therapy may then be scientific, but unable to enchant. It does seem to be true that professional training often focuses more and more on learning of techniques and formulas and can miss the mark in terms of enchantment. That is fully engaging clients and even therapists. I love that. And I think that's what you're talking about, that the manuals that we all get trained by, or most people get trained by, can only take us so far. It's the presence of the therapist, I think you're saying, and your own capacity.
Yes, and I think, and what's key to that is the personal contact. You know, you have to be willing to turn up. Like last time I taught a graduate student class at the University of Ottawa, it was quite interesting. I was teaching EFT and I asked them about their experience, and I really appreciate it. There were 12 of them, and 2 of them said, bless their hearts, they were very honest, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I'm not doing this, I don't want to do it. No. One young woman said, I don't want to touch any emotion, I don't like it. I'm going to assess kids. I thought, well, hey, you're going to meet some emotional kids, but never mind. I'm going to assess kids. I'm not going to do this stuff. This freaks me out. I thought, okay, fair enough. One young man said, no, I don't like this, and I'm going to be a researcher. And then the rest struggled a bit, but there were about 5 of them that said, oh yeah, oh wow, oh, this is turning me on, this is fascinating, this is real stuff, right? And I think what we don't talk about is that therapists are different, and their tolerance for engagement with their clients is different. And you know, and we need a number of models, but not just because clients are different, but because therapists are different. So EFT isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea. But if you ask me, and of course I'm massively biased here, if you ask me what works, if you ask me, you know, how do you create predictable, systematic, almost magical corrective emotional experiences, I'm going to tell you we know how to do that. You know, and it kind of blows my mind to say that too. It sounds really arrogant, actually.
No, it doesn't, because, but I also noticed that there are wonderful similarities in some of the other leading psychotherapists who have developed approaches like that. When I was reading your latest volume, Sue, I noticed what in EMDR we call TICEs: trigger, image, emotion, conflict, and somatic. And you had a similar configuration. And I always hope that Francine Shapiro would get the Nobel Prize for putting that together. But you have a very similar way of crystallizing the experience in its component parts, which I think is where it's at. And I love the fact that you systematically teach people how to do that, because it's not just the emotion, it's all of it. It's the somatic experience, it's the thoughts that go with it. And if you just focus on one micro dimension, you're missing the holistic experience.
Yes, well, we actually talk about assembling emotion, and you know, you can do that. I mean, we know that emotional experiencing focuses on a basic trigger, and often people can't tell you what it is until you slow them down and help them. The specific trigger. When's the last time this happened? Where were you? What was happening? What did you hear? What did you see? The perception, which is very fast, like good, bad, safe, danger, you know, that sort of thing.
And we call that the cognition.
Yeah, and then you get, it's a sort of cognitive appraisal, fast. And then you get a body response. Yes. And this has all gone on while your prefrontal cortex is still drinking tea somewhere, right? It's not. Yes. And then the prefrontal cortex comes in and talks to you about what's going on and tries to figure out what it all means, right? It's a thinking thing, I say to myself. And then you get an action tendency. I want to run. You know, and if you listen to people, they tell you, if you go in like this, how they put their emotional world together, and how that then sets them up to see the world in a certain way, to respond to others in a certain way, to move, to see themselves in a certain light. And this becomes a self-reinforcing pattern. You know, how can I think about it? As my young client said to me, I'm here because I have an eating disorder and I've done CBT, and I've gained weight, but I'm miserable as hell, and I'm anxious, and nobody wants to talk to me about that. And when do you get anxious? Well, when I go out to meet people, and I go out to meet people and I'm always worried, or when my mum calls me up on the phone. When your mum calls you up on the phone, yes, my mum calls me up on the phone and there's something bad. Okay, your mom, and I'll just stay there and repeat. Your mom calls you up on the phone. Could you help me? And you're anxious and you don't know what that's about. You can't put it together, make sense of it. But you know that it happens when you're going to meet people or when your mom calls you, yeah? And there's something bad here. What happens to you as you say that? I can't breathe. There's something in my chest. I can't breathe. I don't know if we should talk about this. And what do you say to yourself? What do you say to yourself? I say, she's not going to listen to me anyway. Nobody's going to listen to me. Nobody's going to listen to me. And no, I don't matter to anybody. You don't matter to anybody. You're talking to your mum. Well, I just don't think I matter, you know. And so what do? I hide out. And then if I get really scared, I stop eating, and then I can numb. And this is what I do. And the more she stops eating, the more she numbs, the more she hides out, the more sensitive she gets to her mother's voice and to meeting other people, the more she becomes raw, the more caught she gets in this cycle. Other people don't respond to her because she's so withdrawn and careful. So then that confirms for her. And she's caught in this self-reinforcing emotional pattern and ways of interacting with other people that leaves her completely stuck in what she calls depression and anxiety. But, you know, she was treated for an eating disorder. And, you know, if you listen to her, it's all about her mum. And people come up with these core, primal attachment scenarios that I think are burned into her brain.
Right, core issues etched into your neural networks. Now, yeah, so that is fascinating. So it's like you're like the female embodiment of Carl Rogers with a bunch of other stuff mixed in, that advanced, accurate empathy. But you're pointing out, I think, where we in psychology and psychiatry have gone wrong with our emphasis on symptoms and addressing symptoms and missing what you're talking about.
Yeah.
What are the core components and drivers of the symptoms? Are just smoke of a dysfunctional system.
Yeah, they're just ways of, what they are is they're ways of protecting the self that have become a prison.
Just maladaptive defenses. Okay.
Yeah, well, yes, okay. But, you know, they're somehow defenses always feels very cognitive for me. Maybe that's just me. But, you know, it's that Bowlby said, you know, that basically all dysfunctional behavior begins as adaptive behavior. And then it gets stuck.
Yes.
It gets stuck and it becomes, from my
point
point of view,
its developmental adaptive value.
That's right. It becomes a prison.
Right. So when you're 3 years old and you're having a temper tantrum to get your mother's attention, it's great. But when you're 33 and you're doing it to get your boss's attention, not adaptive any longer. Usually.
Or when, say, for that client, that eating disordered client, when your mother was your only attachment figure because your father left and your mother worked 3 jobs and you were taken care of by strangers. So she was the only show in town with a safe haven attachment possibility. And what you remember most is that she's tired. And what you used to be scared of was that there were monsters in the dark when you were little, from the time you're about 3 years old. And you used to go down the hallway and carefully, and this is important for this client because she's so careful, carefully climb into your mother's bed without waking her, trying to do it in a way that your mother wouldn't get upset because you were so scared in the dark. And you reach out and you touch your mother. And most of the time your mother would say, "What are you doing here? I told you to go back and sleep in your bed. Mummy needs to sleep. Go back and sleep in your bed." And she'd take her down the hallway and put her in a room. And this young woman hasn't been able to sleep without all the lights in her apartment on until she was about 21. When she sees me, she's 25. Okay, so this scene of primal abandonment, where she decides there's something wrong with me. If I was just careful enough, if I was just thin enough, if I was just careful enough with people and plan everything I'm going to say before I ever go out on a date or ever go out anywhere to, then I'd find a way to connect with them. But of course, the more careful she becomes, the less available she is, the less open she is, and the more she gets bad feedback and she's stuck, right?
Her normal attachment seeking drive is now thwarted because she's sure she's going to get rejected.
Yeah, and I think the great thing about attachment is it tells us that we're wired to bond and we're wired to belong, and we absolutely need that safety. It's not negotiable. It's part of your nervous system, and emotional isolation is traumatizing for human beings.
Yes.
And you cannot develop a competent, strong, resilient sense of self with emotional isolation. So many of our clients, their images starts out in responses to abandonment and rejection. And then, of course, you also get trauma from the people you love, which is even worse. And what we've learned to do in couples is that we help people see how they trigger each other and how they get caught in a certain dance, and they start to blame the dance instead of each other. They create some basic safety, and then we help them reach for each other in what we call a hold me tight conversation, and where they can talk about their fears and needs, and they can do it in a way that pulls the person towards them. Well, once they have that sense of belonging, then the threat system turns off and they can explore and they can be open and they can say, oh, who am I? What do I need? And there's a natural growth process that happens. You don't have to be a magician. But you have to know this growth process is there and trust it. And you have to trust emotion and know how to work with emotion. Yes,
we interviewed Stephen Porges a couple of months ago, and he was talking exactly about this from a neurobiological perspective, that safety circuit. And when people are in the dorsal vagal and they're shut down, they can't engage because they're not safe. And so
that's right.
How we bring them into safety is a challenge.
Yeah, and David Barlow, I like David Barlow's work, although we seem to be on one level, we're in different tribes. He's CBT, but I've included him in the primer. I respect his work when he talks about emotional disorders. That makes sense to me. Depression doesn't show, it's nonsense, some of these labels. Depression and anxiety always go together, and he says, what are the core elements of these emotional disorders? Let's forget half of these labels we've got in DSM, and they're things like avoidance, right? If you're shut down, you're cut off from any kind of new corrective emotional experience. That's exactly the bottom line. And you'll become more and more sensitive to what it is you're avoiding. So it's just an ongoing process that imprisons you, and I found his whole emotional disorder conceptualization very, very compelling. So we used it in the book. It's non-pathologizing.
Yes,
makes a lot of sense, and it takes us out of all these labels and diagnoses. Like, my favorite hate is borderline, because in the hospital that I worked in for 11 years, that was it was code for difficult client, can't work with them, impossible, forget it, just label them. And we didn't find that when we worked with borderlines. It was mostly complex PTSD.
Yes.
And we could work with it. We learned to work with it, and so that one really gets to me. But there's a whole bunch of them I don't think help therapists. They just create a fog in the session. It's, what do you mean when you use the word depression? Tell me about it so I can taste it. Don't give me an abstract label. That doesn't help.
You want to understand the phenomenology of it, what is the experience of it, not just a distant description or a clinical label. Yeah, it's so interesting because we just did this workshop on grief. And what I was recalling as we did it was that
if you work with somebody who's very, very traumatized, I remember sitting with my main client in that book you've just read, who was severely traumatized, right? One of the most severely traumatized people I've ever worked with. And I would sit there listening to her, and I would be, part of me is in my head, and I would be saying, oh, now she needs to get into her fear. Now she needs to get into her anger, her shame. And where that client went again and again and again was grief. Grief. Deep, profound grief that she never felt seen. She always felt rejected, abandoned, victimized. She said, I was invisible. Nobody saw my pain. Nobody cared. I didn't matter. And this is what she's carried through her life. And when you really go in there, you get, so, you know, I'm working with another client now who's depressed. Well, it's the same thing. She's traumatized too, but in her family. But when you go down in there, what you get is all this attachment, longing that was never, ever answered. And the hope and longing, and then the deep, deep, deep wounds when the child or the young person finds themselves alone, not mattering, no one's responding, nobody cares, right? I'm invisible, I don't matter. This is traumatic for human beings. I'm curious if you can contrast EFIT and IFS. Sure. From my point of view, IFS is Gestalt. And, you know, certainly EFT has Gestalt elements too. You take parts of self and you create a drama. So there are certain similarities there. From my point of view, it doesn't make much sense to have lots of abstract names for parts. You know, we don't really go into that. The most normal thing you would see in EFIT is the adult part of self that is resourced by the therapist in the session, turning to the vulnerable child part of self at a particular moment of trauma or abandonment, and supporting that small part of self and holding that small part of self, which then integrates the vulnerability into the more competent adult. You know, it's like parenting yourself in a way. But we don't go into all the different roles of parts of self of the protector. We do reflect. I think we reflect more. I'm not sure Rogers would like us, actually. I thought Rogers was a genius, but I think he would say to me, Sue Johnson, just reflect way too much. You know, because somebody asked me, well, how many times in a session do you reflect? I said, are you joking? I do it all the time. I do it to slow things down. I do it to focus me. I do it to give me time. I do it to run things past in my head so I can resonate more. I do it to hold the client. I do it to regulate. I do it all the time.
Can you give us an example of how you reflect, like a classic reflection that you do, just so the audience can hear it?
Sure. Let me see if I can try. You know, let me, I just watched my wonderful colleague do a tape, okay? So this lady lost her husband. Her husband died after 40 years, and he chose assisted suicide. And she was tormented by the scene where he chose assisted suicide. And she hasn't been able to recover from the grief. And all her friends are telling her, move on, move on, move on, right? And my colleague starts to focus on her emotion and starts to focus on how she's numb all the time, right? And how she's numbed out, and how in that setting, it wouldn't have been fair to feel, because he was choosing to die and she didn't want him to feel bad, and right, she wanted to respect him. And so it wasn't fair. And so she shut down, and now she can't move out of that. And of course, if you're numbed out, nothing happens, right? You're not open. And so Leanne was beautiful, and she said, so could you help me? You know, what I'm hearing you say is that you loved your husband so much. You loved him. And so, of course, you wanted to be there for him. You wanted to be there for him, yeah? And so what you did there was you shut yourself down. Yeah, you shut, because she uses that word. If you give me an image in EFIT, I will pick it up, and we call it an emotional handle. I will write it down. I will use it again and again because it takes me into your emotional world. So you cut yourself off. Yeah. And somehow 2 years later, you're still cut off. Yeah. What does that feel like right now as we talk about that? What does that feel like in your body? And she says, well, I'm not sure I want to do this. I think I'm not sure I want to talk about this. And people have catastrophic ideas about emotion itself. She says a classic one. She says, if I start talking about this,
I'll never stop.
It'll get worse, and it'll go on forever, and I'll go crazy. And you hear the Anne say, so can you help me? You shut down because you loved your husband. Of course you did. You were being there for your husband. And it was kind of difficult to find yourself, right? It's difficult to find yourself. And now you say, oh, this somehow feels strange and alien and dangerous. And you say, better stay away. It's not good. Something very bad will happen if I let myself feel. Is that what's happening? Something very bad will happen if I let myself feel. And the lady says, yes. Then she'll do it again. You know, it's like, I have this thing in my head. It's just a Sue thing. I just play with it. If I present, Bowlby said the essence of therapy was to move people through frightening, alien, and unacceptable emotion. Right. And you go in and through. And the solution is through. Then they can regulate themselves. They find their emotional balance, and they can find solutions. So that's what Bowlby talked about. Right. And that's what we try to do there. But you have to stay there for a while. You know, if somebody doesn't want to feel, I'll say, and this is what you did. You shut down. Yeah. And what's going to happen if you don't shut down is something awful's going to happen. You're going to get stuck in all this pain. Is that the right word for you? Could you help me? What's the right word for you? You're going to get stuck in all this pain. She says, it hurts. I'll get stuck in the hurt. Yes, I understand. So you say to yourself, don't go into the hurt. Yeah. But the pain's still there, right? The pain of sitting with him when he's deciding to die, and you shut down. But the pain's still there. It calls for you. Yeah. It's calling for you, all this hurt and pain. So hurt becomes an emotional handle. It's terribly simple. And shut myself down or cut myself off becomes, so you cut yourself off, right? That's what you do. And I do it at least 5 times.
Yeah, but you say it's simple, Sue, but I think it's masterful. You say it's simple, Sue, but it's masterful.
Oh, okay.
It's elegant, but it's not simple because there are a lot of components to what you're doing. It's not just reflection. It's also what you were talking about earlier, the capacity to sit with another human being, take them where they are in their suffering, and take them deeper into it without flinching too much. And that's not simple.
And I'd be so curious to see, like, how did you learn how to do that? Like, where did that come from? What was it, the pub?
No, well, the pub taught me that to watch the dramas of human beings, and that there were patterns in the drama, because, you know, I would just sit and watch all these people fight and flirt and say the exact same things to my father every time they came in. And I think, why is this man saying the same things to my daddy? And it's not about the words. Oh, what's it about then? You know, so I started to be able to look at patterns, and I got pretty comfortable with emotion, because there was emotion all over the place, especially on a Friday night when people got drunk. Okay. But so I wasn't intimidated. But when I first started, I came to Canada as a graduate student, decided that I was bored out of my mind as a graduate student, got a job in a residential treatment center for disturbed adolescents in Vancouver. Didn't know what on earth I was doing. And we had some of the most traumatized, disturbed kids, adolescents in that residential treatment center. And we didn't know what we were doing. but there was a lot of excitement and teamwork and play. And those kids taught me oceans. You know, my first kid, I talked about this at the Networker conference. My first kid wouldn't speak, which is tricky for talk therapy, right? And he used to, he was afraid to swallow his saliva. So not only would he not speak, he'd sit in front of you and he'd go, but he'd start holding his cheeks. So I would lean over and touch him and say, Lee, it's okay, I'm here, swallow. 1, 2, 3, I'm going to do it with you, okay? Here we go, swallow. Now, I didn't know how I learned to do that, I just did, okay? And gradually, he started to open up and talk to me. So I learned so much from Lee. I learned so much from Bruce, who was violent, who scared the hell out of everybody. And I started to see that the moment before he got violent, he got terrified. He was triggered. You know, there was something underneath this ranting, all these threats, you know, and those kids taught me a huge amount. And learning Rogers and, you know, learning about Gestalt taught me a huge amount. But I think I was kind of overconfident. You know, I was really into it. I was totally on fire about psychology and therapy. But I was a nutcase, to tell you the truth. All right. So I was so intense, it was ridiculous. But then
I'm glad you're not intense anymore.
Oh no, I'm not intense. I've got over it. Yeah. But then, you know, my last sort of placement, I walked in and they said, "Oh, we're so glad you're here. You're a bit more experienced than most of the students we have, and we're in a real bind. We've had 3 people fall sick, and we know you're only supposed to see 2 couples a week, but would you mind seeing couples on the hour every hour for 3 days?" And like stupid said, "Sure, how hard can it be?" Well, you know, I started to go in there and work with some of these. I still remember them. My goodness, you know, they would be screaming at the top of their. I remember one very intricate EFT moment at the beginning of my training when apparently everyone in the clinic was lined up outside my door wondering whether they should come in and save me because this couple was screaming at each other. And then they heard an incredibly EFT intervention. They heard me say, "Shut up." And they did. So, but after that, I didn't know what to do. So I realized, I don't know what to do here. I don't even know what's happening. Does anyone understand love? I read, no, nobody understands love. It's a mystery. Well, how can it be? That's ridiculous, right? Like somebody's got to understand love. So gradually, I started taping these couples and watching them ad nauseum. I'd watch a tape 20 times. I'd watch it from the female client's point of view, from the male client's point of view, from my point of view. I'd watch it from the dance and the cycle. I'd watch what I did, what worked, what didn't. And I started putting together this ridiculous little manual. And I got so caught up in it. You know, I had a thesis already. And I went to my advisor and said, "I don't want to do it. I want to try and see if this stuff works." And he basically said, "You're crazy." I thought, I'm crazy, but I'm going to do it. And that was the first study of EFT with couples. And my God, when the data came out of the computer, which in those days was sheets of paper, I thought, all right, okay, there's a mistake. I put the data in wrong. Okay, there's a mistake here. So we ran it 3 times. And we still got the same results. The results were stunning. Oh my God. But I still didn't really know. I knew experiential techniques. I knew certain things worked. I knew you had to reflect back the pattern to people, what they did with their emotions and how that translated into how they engaged with other people and vice versa. I knew that, but I didn't really have an understanding of what was happening until I went to a conference and I listened to Neil Jacobson, and he stood up and said, intimate relationships are bargains. They're a rational exchange and you can negotiate for anything. And they're bargains and you teach people to problem solve, and that's all it is. So, and then I went to the bar, which is significant because I grew up in a pub. and sat, and I think it was Les Greenberg said to me, well, what's wrong with what he said? I said, that's ridiculous. Of course, intimate relationships aren't bargains. It's ridiculous. They're all loaded with emotion. He said, well, if they aren't bargains, what are they? I said, well, they're emotional bonds. And the whole of Bowlby, who I'd read, but I only related to mother and child, went tickety, 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 tick. And I thought, oh my God, they're emotional, but oh my God, and everything shifted. It was, and then I wrote a little article on bonds and bargains, which the Journal of Marriage and Family Therapy, the Journal of Marriage and Family
Have you,
Therapy,
Neil?
they had it forever. And finally, Alan Gorman wrote to me and said, Sue Johnson, I wish to tell you, I've sent this out for review 4 times. And in each review, half the people hate it and half the people love it. So I'm the editor, so I'm going to publish it. And that was Bonds and Bargains. And it basically said, love is the adult version of the emotional bond between mother and infant. And if we understand that, we understand the emotions and how they make sense. We understand the patterns where people get stuck, and we understand what people need to create a more secure bond. And it started, and at that point, adult attachment was just chugging out of the starting gate with people, wonderful people like Phil Shaver, Mario Michelanza, and just chugging. And the resistance was wild. You know, I would send in an article and, oh goodness, I'd get rejections that were, 6 pages, single spaced diatribe about how I was bad news. I was some sort of, I don't know, I was just
criminal,
devil incarnate, right? I was helping people become dependent wimps. I was, and then it started to shift. People started to listen, and we started to do more and more research, and we started to look at not just getting results, but how we got them. We started to do research, process research. You know, we started taping our couples and coding the sessions that the therapist said, this is where change happens. So we code it. We say, and then we started seeing, what are you going to call these? I don't know, corrective emotional experiences, call them bonding events, call them hold me tight conversations. And they started to predict everything, every damn thing. You know, better relationship, improved relationship, more trust, less symptoms of depression and PTSD, everything under the sun, right? And so I just got caught in attachment, and I still believe attachment science is the way forward for the field of psychotherapy. It absolutely is. It's gold, and we're crazy if we don't embrace it. You know, it's for me, it's the psychological equivalent of Einstein's, what is it?
Theory of relativity.
Yes. It just explains so much in such an elegant way that's researched, and it's eminently practical. The real reason I like attachment isn't because of anything I just said. The real reason I love attachment is it never lets me down as a therapist, never. And I've seen a lot of very complicated cases and very difficult cases, and it always gives me a map for people's emotional reality, for where they're stuck, for what they need. It never lets me down, and that impresses me.
So when you say it never lets you down, like for you, just what do you picture in your mind when you say that?
It always helps me understand, tune into people.
It
always helps me understand the logic behind their apparently negative behaviors or crazy behaviors or emotionally over the top behaviors. They're shut down. It always helps me make sense of that. It always shows me a way forward. It tells me what people's longings and needs are. It's very hopeful. It basically says, if you create safety for people and you help them regulate their emotions and come into emotional balance, they'll grow. And you don't have to be the magician. You don't have to lead people by the nose with 1,000 exercises over years to make them grow. You just do this, you give them a sense of belonging and safety and emotional regulation and a way to look at themselves and see how they're stuck. They'll grow. They'll just, you tune into an organic growth process. And that is, well, I could say a lot of things, but as a therapist, it's exhilarating.
When you're
Because-
talking about this exhilaration and this growth and this attachment,
Yeah.
what do you physically experience?
What do I physically experience as a therapist?
Yes.
Oh, well, in the institute that I don't go to anymore because I've moved to the West Coast, but in Ottawa, you'd see people come out of their offices, and they'd look at me and they'd go, yes, right. And you'd know they've just created a hold me tight conversation. And you'd know that if you watched it on a tape, you'd see the same pattern. And, you know, magic becomes predictable if you really understand what's going on, which is, you know, corrective emotional experiences have a beginning and an end, and you can set them up. But for me, I still find it exhilarating. I find it, well, I'm going to take a bit from the book because that was a very intense client. When I work with Henny, who's in the primer, and she does remember for the first time her father raped her. And what is significant for me is it isn't the rape so much she remembers. What she remembers is that her father said, let's go out and have a day together. And all her longing and yearning to be seen and held and cared for. And he was a violent man, but maybe she thought, or she was open, all her longing, he was going to take her out and be with her. And he didn't. He took her to his workplace and violently raped her and then said, how's that for a day together? Okay. And it was the attachment injury and the violation of all her longings that she remembered. And I think that was probably the most intense experience I've ever gone through that session. She wept to the point where, you know, her nose was just streaming and she was shaking, and I was supporting her and then touching and supporting, you know, saying, is this far enough? Should we stop now? And she said, no, I'm into it. And she tells me what happens, and she grieves and shakes and cries. And then I stop it and I hold her and I reflect what we've done. And I'm worried about her because it's very intense. And on the TSI, which is the Briere scale for trauma, her responses when she came to see me were off the charts for every symptom. Okay, so I'm worried about her. And she comes in the next time and I say, Henny, I've been worried about you. Last time was so hard for you. I can't imagine. It was hard for me to sit with you. It was hard for me. I wept for you as I listened, which I told her as it was happening, right? And I said, help me, how are you? And what she did in the session was she went as an adult and held that little child on the cold bathroom floor where she'd just been raped and talked to her. That's what she did. That's where we ended up, okay? And she said to me, I'm fine, Sue. I said, you're fine? Could you help me? What do you mean you're fine? Could you help me? She said, oh, well, now I have me.
Mm-hmm.
We only have 1 minute left.
What you asked me how I felt.
We're
Michael.
just getting
She said,
going
No, but
here.
you have just hit the, you know.
Yes.
for
But we're
me-
gonna.
This has never
We're
happened.
gonna stop in a minute, and then we're gonna stop the recording, and we're gonna hang around and talk for a little while longer.
All right.
But
how I
we're
felt,
not.
Michael, was
But-
exhilarated.
But you can
I
still answer.
protest.
You can protest all you want, and I'm responding to your protest, but we have to end on time. But for those who are watching, we're going to continue. We will not be recording. This is where we sort of talk a little more freely. And so thank you all for attending. We hope to see you next month with Alberta Paas, who will be here to join us. So
Oh,
thank you all for
Canadian.
watching, and we hope you stay for our debrief session starting now. Thank you.
Okay. Anyway, so I was asking this question and you